Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Bursa Malaysia Eyes webinar for tonight, entitled Diversify Your Shariah-compliant Investment through i-REIT. And today we have a special guest, Encik Anwar Marzuki, who is from the KLCC Staple Properties and REITs. He is the CFO for KLCC Properties. So he's going to basically explain to us what is REIT, what is i-REIT, and the prospects of REITs in our market and the future of property investments in Malaysia itself. So welcome, Encik Anwar, to the show.
Thank you.
Right, so we're going to first, before we start, we're going to ask you this first question, right? How many of you know what is a real estate investment trust or REIT? So you can just answer yes or no, and we'll take a look at the results in a short while. Your participation. Now let's take a look at the results. All right, so we have 67% knows about REIT, but still there's 33% who do not know about REIT. So that's the reason why we are here today, and hopefully the Encik Anwar will be explained to you what is REIT and how important REIT is in the financial markets. So let's start with the first question, Encik Anwar. Can you basically let the audience know what is REIT is all about? And of course, what's the difference between the normal REITs and i-REIT or Islamic REIT or Sharia-compliant REITs? And why do we really need to invest in REITs in general?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much. I would like to extend my appreciation to Bursa Malaysia and Equities Tracker for inviting me today to enlighten you on this title, Diversify Your Sharia-compliant Investment through i-REIT. Okay, I start with, first is introduction to REIT as to answer the question that Benny posed. Okay, REIT, as you can see from the slide, is actually a fund or a trust actually that invests in a portfolio of an income generating commercial real estate. Okay, those real estate can be in the form of many assets, many real estates. For example, shopping complexes, industrial properties, office blocks, and also hospitals. This is just to name a few examples of real estates. Okay, when we say REIT, it is a trust. So whoever that invests in REIT is actually buying a unit in this trust, which represent an equity ownership into the REIT. And as the name suggested, the trust, we must have a trustee to govern the management and organization of this trust. So there's a trust deed that covers the setup of REIT, and there's also a few rules that is actually laid out by the Securities Commission and also Bursa Malaysia, in particular for those REITs that are listed. Okay, investment in REIT actually provide an indirect access to the large pool of a stable real estate. Because if you can see later on, the assets that are actually owned and held by REIT are actually normally a big size of assets, which actually is a difficult and also I mean, for an individual shareholders or individual person like us to buy. And so as such, investment through REIT actually allows an individual shareholder to have right and indirect access to these properties. For REIT, there's also tax efficiency for a debt structure, because in the Securities Commission guidelines, it allows REIT to be a tax-free entity if the REIT declares 90%, a minimum 90% of its income, distributable income, to as dividend. So you can browse through the Malaysian REIT. Almost all REIT in Malaysia declares at least 90% of its distributable income as dividend. Okay.
So you almost get a certain dividend every single, like in this case, they might probably pay on a quarterly basis and a half-yearly basis and a yearly basis.
Correct, exactly. Yeah. Some REITs pays quarterly, some half-yearly. But in order for them to enjoy the tax-free status, it has to declare at least 90% of the distributable income.
Right, so that's the mandate that all the fund managers for REITs.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So you can explain to us the difference now between Islamic REIT and a normal REIT.
Okay. The Islamic REIT is a normal form of REIT. However, the differences is only that it allows and it can only operate in permissible activities according to Sharia. So the structure and the setup is exactly the same as the normal REIT, except that, as I mentioned, it only allows the activities are only based on permissible activities according to Sharia, and this is actually governed by the guidelines issued by the Securities Commission, which was amended recently on 15 March 2018. And this is actually named as guideline on listed real estate investment trust. It also covers the Islamic REIT. And so if you browse through the guidelines, it has a specific column, a section on this Islamic REIT. So we go on further. What is actually the permissible investment for an Islamic REIT? There are three permissible investment as set out in the REIT guidelines. First is it has to be a real estate. This real estate is actually under the guidelines. The trust, the REIT must own at least the value of the real estate must be at least 75% of the total value of the assets held by REIT. So this real estate, it can be a direct ownership of a physical land or any man-made items on top of the land, or it can be a shareholding in a special purpose vehicle. And this special purpose vehicle must own a physical asset. So it's specified in the REIT guidelines. It has to own a specific asset. So the real estate must have a control over this special purpose vehicle. So that's the first part of the permissible investment. The second part is actually the REIT is also allowed to own non-real estate assets. However, these assets must be property related and such as units of other listed REITs. But for Islamic REIT, it has to be, of course, Shariah-compliant securities. It also can own the debt securities or sukuk in this instance, issued by the property companies. If you look through the guidelines, it allows up to 5% in terms of shareholding in these other listed REITs. If it is a single company, but if it is a few company, it can be up to 10%. The REIT can also own cash deposits, of course, as a trust or as a Islamic company. You usually have cash or deposits balances. So this form part of the assets owned by REIT. And the placement for these assets, that means you have this extra, you need to place into a money market instrument to gain profit. So it has to be in the form of a Sharia-compliant instruments. So these are the main, the three permissible investment for an Islamic REIT. Okay, we go into slightly deeper into the i-REIT. i-REIT means it's actually Islamic REIT. Okay, this is actually the Sharia parameters for an Islamic REIT.
So this is how the Sharia advisors actually select whether it can be Sharia compliant or not.
Yes, because these are the parameters that that govern to ensure that that particular REIT is an Islamic REIT. Okay. First is actually the rental income from a real estate from the i-REITs. Okay. It's not easy to have a fully Sharia compliant assets whereby the entire 100% of the income are Sharia compliant. So the guidelines allows a REIT to start with at least 20% of the rental income coming from the non-Sharia compliant. This is in particular for those who just been listed, and so it started from there 20%. But the guidelines now with the revised one requires that percentage of the non-Sharia compliant rental income to taper down to 5% by the end of the 10 financial year. So there must be an effort to reduce the rental income from the non-Sharia compliant activities.
Right.
Okay, that's the first. Secondly, the investment, the deposit, as I mentioned earlier, there is actually a cash available, extra that the REIT has. It has to be invested in the form of a Sharia compliant instruments. So that's the second one. And the third one is insurance. Of course, as a real estate, the owner must take the insurance to cover from various risks, and that insurance must be in the form of takaful, so that it complies with the Sharia parameters. Right. So as you rightly pointed out, Danny, that Sharia scholars, as a REIT, later I will share with you how the structure is all about. One of the critical component of an Islamic REIT, there must be a Sharia committee which actually look at the activities and ensure the activities of the REIT are Sharia compliant.
So what are some examples which are non-Sharia compliant activities?
Oh, okay. These are, okay, the listed on the screen is actually these non-compliant activities. This is specifically set out in the SC guidelines, which includes conventional banking, conventional insurance, gambling, liquor and liquor related activities, and the list goes on as you can see on the screen. At one time, there used to be a hotel in the as also listed as non-compliant. Right. But with the revised guidelines, that activity has been removed from the listing. So as if I recap again, the rental activities, as I mentioned earlier, is up to when the REIT was initially set up, it can go up to 20%. So 20% can cover the rental income from these activities. However, in the 10th anniversary of the REIT, it has to be tapered down to 5%. Yes, right. Okay. Why don't I go deeper into the what is the structure of an i-REIT? As you can see from the slide, the central part is the trust, and the holders on top is actually the investors. In this case, whoever that invests, it can be people like you and me or whoever goes to the stock market and buy the stocks, the REIT. That will be the investors that will be investing into the REIT. And as a return, you look at distribution. We call it distribution, but in the normal stock, we call it the dividend paid by the REIT. Okay, on the right-hand side, there's a trustee. As I mentioned, as the name suggested, it's a real estate investment trust. It is a trust, so there must be a trustee that actually govern the activities of the REIT. And this is in particular to ensure that the activities of REIT protects the unit holders. And whatever the REIT manager or the property manager later on does, it has to protect the investment portfolio that the REIT has. The one below is REIT manager. Of course, as a REIT, there must be a setup to manage the REIT. This can come like a person like me handling the finance for the REIT, and I have my colleague and also my CEO who's actually managing the REIT itself. So for an i-REIT, the REIT manager must ensure that there's no activities in relation to riba or interest that is actually being carried out by the REIT. So the same thing when the REIT goes out to borrow money, it has to be in the form of Shariah-compliant instrument. In this case, it can be a sukuk or other means. So the REIT manager will appoint a property manager, because this is actually a real estate. It has to appoint a property manager to manage and to maintain the property. So this property manager receives management fees from the REIT manager, and in turn it manages all the properties under the REIT. And the properties will then be let out, tenanted by the tenants, and in return the tenant will pay the rental to the property, the REIT itself. So then the REIT will use this money to pay the dividend or distribution, in this case, to the unit holders. Okay, what is integral for an i-REIT, as I mentioned earlier, is the left box, which is the green one. We call it a Shariah board or Shariah advisor. Shariah advisor is actually a role that is governed under the guidelines of the Securities Commission. This is actually to ensure that the activities done by the REIT manager in managing the REIT complies with the Sharia principles. So in this case, should the REIT want to invest in new properties or buy new properties, it must first obtain the approval of the Sharia to sanction that activities or that asset is actually a Sharia compliant asset. And this will, the Sharia committee will also, the Sharia board will also determine the percentage that is actually, whether it has surpassed or is still within the 20% threshold allowed by the guidelines. The role is actually important. The this Sharia board, it is required under the SC guidelines for this Sharia board to issue a report every year to state whether the activities of the i-REIT actually complies with the Sharia principle.
Right.
Yeah. So just to share with you the journey of the Islamic REIT, the i-REIT in Malaysia. The Islamic REIT guidelines was issued in 2005. In fact, that is actually the first Islamic REIT guidelines issued in the world. So thereon, it has attracted a few REITs to be set up under the Islamic principle. The first one what was set up is Al-Akar Healthcare REIT. This is the KPJ group. The hospitals are actually held by this Al-Akar Healthcare REIT, and this is actually the first REIT issued in June 2006. The second one was Al-Hadara Bastard REIT. However, this is subsequently been delisted. It is a REIT in the form of a plantation estate. And the third one was Exist REIT. And Exist REIT, as you know, this is actually an industrial estate. Initially, as this REIT was listed as a conventional REIT. However, when the REIT guidelines set up, they would like to capitalize into become an i-REIT. So they converted the company, the trust, into an Islamic REIT in December 2008. Okay. Then in May 2013, that was my company, which actually KLCC REIT, is actually the company was already listed in 2004. However, as is REIT, we also would like to convert our setup into an Islamic REIT, and that's we form a REIT in the form of a KLCCP staple group, and this was listed in May 2013. And the last one was As-Salam REIT. This is also part of the group, the Johor Corp group. It is a REIT that was set up based on a few retail assets in the form of KFC and Pizza Hut outlets. So that's thus far the journey of an Islamic REIT.
Right. So I'm sure Encik Anwar, one of the reasons why they want to get into Islamic REIT is because if you just get the normal REIT, you only have the investors who are looking at conventional investments. So, and in Islamic REIT is available for conventional and for also investors who look for Sharia compliant. So you actually have a new set of investors who are actually able to invest in the company.
You're right. Yeah. Exactly. That is one of the key advantage of an Islamic REIT. It can attract a bigger pool of investors. So as you rightly pointed out, the Islamic fund managers must invest in an Islamic instrument, and one of it is an Islamic REIT. However, the conventional fund managers can also invest into this Islamic REIT. So what it means is it has a bigger pool of investors. Then when we have a bigger pool of investors, theoretically the REIT, the shares, the unit of the trust should be liquid. Whenever you want to sell, there should be a buyer looking for that. And what it means when the assets are liquid, it provides more. It can allow more transactions on this asset, and theoretically, when more transaction, it can lead to better prices of the stocks. Okay. Just a little bit more on the portfolio of assets. This slide gives the portfolio of assets that various REITs, the 4 REITs, i-REITs that I mentioned earlier. As you can see, the KLCC REIT is actually a diversified REIT. It has namely the Petronas Twin Towers, Menara 3 Petronas, and Menara ExxonMobil as part of the asset portfolio. And as an entire portfolio, that gives a value of about 17 billion ringgit. Whereas the other one, healthcare REIT, this has a few assets, as you mentioned, as set out in the slides, namely the KPJ Healthcare University College, and also the KPJ hospitals. Next one is Axis Industrial REIT. As the name suggested, it has a few business parks, and also the Menara Axis, the Axis Business Campus, and also the Crystal Plaza. And in total, it gives a value of about 2.5 billion ringgit. And the last one is As-Salam. As I mentioned earlier, it has assets in the form of selected KFC outlets and Pizza Hut outlets, which it gives a value of almost 1 billion ringgit.
Right. So in terms of the total property valuation commercially, because most of these are commercials, right? There are no REITs that does residential investments. Are there any?
So far, no.
No, right?
Yeah. It is mostly commercial, because the main income for REIT is rental. So the commercial segment can give a better rental income to REIT.
Right. Right. So if you look at the percentage of the total portfolio value under management by these REIT companies as compared to the total value of a property, let's say Kuala Lumpur, what kind of percentage are we looking at?
Okay, I would say in terms of market cap, in terms of, okay, first, if it is in the form of total over the property market, I would say this REIT market alone can come to about at least 10, 15%.
Right,
in terms
right.
of
Ballpark figure.
Yeah, correct. So that is actually generally about the Malaysian REIT market. It's just not the Islamic REIT, but
sure.
it's actually
the total,
the total
Malaysian REIT market.
Malaysian REIT market.
Right. So that's quite a substantial amount. I mean,
Correct.
Right. So I think if you're a REIT owner, I mean, one of the best ways to get your hand onto property investments in Malaysia is to get a REIT, because later Encik Anwar will also explain to us the differences between owning a REIT and owning a property, and what kind of returns that you'll be looking at when investing in REITs. But before we go there, so we're gonna again ask you a question. The next question for you is: do you actually own a REIT today? Right? And it can be any REIT, whether it's a conventional REIT or whether it's an Islamic REIT. If you own a REIT, you can say yes. If you do not own a REIT, you can say no. Your participation. Now let's take a look at the results of this poll. Well, so we 80% still don't own a REIT, so we hope that we can rectify this after this presentation today, right?
I hope I can.
Great. So let's move on to the next session. Next section, we're going to talk about now investing in properties yourself directly versus investing in REITs. So Encik Anwar, maybe you want to explain to us what are the differences and what kind of returns that you'll be looking at investing in REITs compared to the investing direct in properties.
Okay. Before I dwell into that further, but I just give the main difference between investing in REIT and investing directly into a real estate.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. This is the how we invest in property. I believe many of us, or including the viewers, may also have invested directly into properties. So this is very straightforward. An investor goes to the developer or any sub-sale market, buy properties in the form of houses or shop lots and so on. And the income from this investment can come from either the rental income, if you rent out, or at the same time also capital appreciation should later when you divest this property. So it is a straightforward investment, direct buying into properties. Okay. So let's see what makes a difference between investing into a REIT. A REIT investor, people like us, we want to invest, just go straight to the stock market. You can buy into a REIT, and this is like the REIT will use that money to invest into the various properties. As you can see, whether it can be in the form of office towers, mall, retail outlets, or hotel and so on, depending on the category of the REITs that you invest into. Later you will see a bit more detail of what are the samples of REITs that we have in the Malaysian market. So how do you get the income from investing into this REIT? First is in the form of a dividend income that the REIT declares. Most of the REIT declares dividend income every quarter. When it announces the quarter result, it gives the dividend or distribution in a sense to the investors. Since the REIT is listed and the same as other listed entities, the REIT also can have a capital appreciation. You invest at when the price is low, and when you divest or sell the units when the price is higher, so you get a capital appreciation. So it's exactly like investing in shares. For REIT, there is a difference between REIT and property developer. REIT is actually owning an investment property, and this property is actually normally is actually quite a sizable property, and it is an income generating asset. So the income comes from the rental that the tenant pay. Whereas for the property developer, they develop the property in the form of building houses, terrace houses, bungalow houses, or even shop lots, and they sell that property to the buyer. So there is a difference in terms of category of assets that is owned by a property stock as well as REIT. And REIT is, as you can see earlier, as I mentioned, is very highly governed by the Securities Commission. It has a trustee to govern the operation of the REIT, and it also has, in the case of i-REIT, it has a Sharia board to cover their activities. So you, as an investor, you are well protected with regards to the activities or investment done by REIT. Okay. Just to give you a deeper understanding with regards to difference between REITs and properties. Okay, first is liquidity. If you have REIT units, that can be sold in the market as and when you like. So it is liquid in that sense. But you compare again properties, you own properties, there's a whole lot of processes you need to go through in disposing your assets. First, maybe you need to get your agent and you need to market that property, and later on you need to sign the sale and purchase agreement, and then later on you need to get, if it is a leasehold property, you need to get the certain state authority to approve that. Right. That can take a few months. Yes. Before you can get a whole money, cash, correct. And that also after you dispose with under the new the recent budget, even if you hold 5%, there is actually a capital gains tax. Right. If you make money out of selling of those assets. Okay. Second part is diversification. Because REIT is actually a fund. And it pulls fund from various sources, including the investors. So it has a bigger fund to invest into properties, and thus with that bigger fund, it allows the REIT to invest into a diverse set of pool of properties. Whereas if it is a property, it limits the amount of investment according to what you can invest into that property. With that, you can only invest into a handful of properties, unless you pool funds among your friends and invest it. But again, compared to REIT, it's still a small portion compared to what the fund that the REIT has.
And it's more regulated, it's more safe because
Of course,
there's a set
yes.
of guidelines and
Set
all that.
guidelines and yeah, I mean it's very highly regulated.
Yeah, so if you get someone who pulls the money, it can be risky, right?
Yes,
The guy
yes.
can take the money and just run
Yeah,
away.
you need to trust first that person that you pull the fund together. Right. Okay, the third one is actually the affordability. Okay, the REIT as per the shares, you can have an investment of a minimum of 1,000 ringgit, and you can invest into the depending on the share price, the price of the REIT. However, the properties requires a sizable commitment. At least you need to come out with at least the 10% of for the down payment before you can get the loan to fund the remaining portion of the property. The next one is dividend yield. Historically, the REIT has been giving a very steady income because you need to see REIT as actually a stable investment portfolio instrument. Because it has a very stable assets, because only assets that are actually giving a stable rental income qualified to be pulled into a REIT. And so what it means, later on it will give a very stable dividend yield. Compared to the properties, it has to be then depending on the type and location of the properties that you buy. So in certain areas it can give a bigger return, and in certain areas, depending on the environment or the surrounding area, it can give a lower return.
Right.
And the next one is professional management. As I mentioned earlier, it is actually there is a property manager, a professional property manager that actually they manage this REIT. And these property manager are licensed by the Securities Commission. Not only that, in order to get the license being renewed every year, this property manager must undergo course, certain hours of course that actually approved by Securities Commission. So you can see this property manager role is important and is also governed by the Securities Commission. Okay, for investment in properties, so the management part of it is up to you. If you invest, you rent, then you manage that.
You manage yourself.
You manage yourself, correct.
Even plumbing and fixing of pipes and all that, you have to do yourself.
Yes, correct. Even if the tenant call you, if there's any problem with your property, you also need to deal with it. Right. Either directly or you appoint another contractor. So it takes time for you to also manage that part. Okay. The last one is capital gains. As I mentioned earlier, I mean this capital gains as a REIT is actually a stable form of instrument investment. It gives a modest capital return, as most of assets are actually stable income generating. And as a set up, it is not taxable, provided if it is paying 90% of its income as dividend. Whereas in properties, if you sell that properties, you will need to pay the property gains tax arising from that disposal.
Right.
Okay.
So you actually have, for REIT managers or property managers, or REIT managers per se, because you are the one who make decisions, right? And
yes.
The property managers manage the properties.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So you probably have certain or main requirements before you go and invest in a company, and maybe you want to explain that.
Okay. It depends on the objective of the REIT and also the strategy. Later, I will delve a little bit more on the strategies, or also the businesses that the REIT has. Okay, some REIT are actually an office focus. They have the pool of assets are actually mainly come from the rental of offices.
Yeah.
They own the office and the rental from the office. Some are actually mixed, some with a mixture of office and retail outlets.
Right.
It can be shopping malls or any other, located in within KL, within the city, or some the suburban malls. Okay? So it depends on the strategy of that REIT.
Right.
So as such, when you want to invest in REIT, you also must study what kind of strategy that they have adopted. And then match against your appetite, whether is it something that you want to put your money into, whether it's the form of office, and if you look at office, where is the location of the office? Because it's important. As we know now, there are quite a glut of office spaces.
Right.
So you need to know where is the REIT that you're going to invest has the location of the assets, the offices. So that is actually important before you invest into REIT, to understand what kind of strategy that this REITs has adopted.
Right. I think that's one of the beauty thing about investing in REITs as compared to stocks, because you want to look at the stocks, you have to look at the financials, you have to look at the company who's running it, and so on. But for REITs, you can actually go there and feel it and see it yourself, whether it's whether the property is worth investing, right?
Correct. Because that's exactly, it has to be real estate.
Right.
So even as I mentioned earlier, the real estate must comprise minimum 75% of the assets owned by REITs.
Right.
So rest assured that the assets being put under REIT, it has to be an income generating assets, because the dividend will come from this rental of these assets.
Right. So we'll move forward. But if you have any questions, you can just type in on your questions box. You can keep the questions coming. We will only run the questions, we'll compile them, and we'll ask the questions at the last half an hour of this webinar. Right. So moving on, we're gonna just basically, I think we have quite limited time here, so we're gonna skip a few parts. They have an understanding, but I think as investors, they will prefer to know more about the returns. What kind of returns will be expecting in investing in REITs itself?
I just plot what are the returns. This is actually comparing against Shariah-compliant stocks. This can include REITs also inside there. The REIT one is actually the FBM KLCI, which is actually the main index. Whereas the yellow and the green one are actually the Sharia compliance stocks index, the Emas Sharia Index and the Hijrah Sharia Index. As you can see, this has actually been plotted since 2010 until recently, a few days ago. This has actually outperformed the FBN KLCI, so the chart itself by itself explain how the performance of the Sharia compliant stocks in Bursa Malaysia.
So basically, it's actually outperforming the KLCI as a general benchmark altogether.
Yes. Right.
Okay, so next question to the audience. We're going to go to the next poll. Right. The third question I'm going to ask you is: do you own properties? As it means you actually buy physical properties, physical real estate. If you use it for investments only, not the place where you stay. And if you do use it as an investment, do you invest it in commercial or residential? All right, thank you very much for your participation. Now let's take a look at the polls results. Okay, still a lot of residential. There are still about 60% who are not investing into property per se. So I think for those 60%, it's probably a good time for you to look at REITs.
Yeah.
Right,
I think they're waiting for REIT.
Yeah, maybe they're waiting for this. So hopefully they'll take action after this. Right. So in general, we will move on to the next section about how do you invest in REITs and what are the key criteria in selecting a REIT to invest.
Okay. Okay, why don't I just go straight into selecting of REIT? Yeah. Okay. First, of course, REIT, you need to have a strong management with experienced management team that can be obtained from the annual reports that were issued or prospectus or whatever. So you need to estimate whether these people who are actually knowledgeable and experienced in managing the REIT. Secondly, is location. This is because REIT is really the rental income is important for REIT. As such, a good property located in a strategic location will give a higher yield, a higher rental income. Next is actually dividend payment track record. Okay, as I mentioned, some REITs pay within 6 monthly, some REITs pay every quarter. So it depends on how you want your return to come to you, whether it's in the form of every quarter or every 6 months. And you need to see also what kind of dividend yield that these REITs are giving.
Right.
So that's why the number 2 and number 3 works hand in hand, because you have assets located in strategic locations. It can give a better capital appreciation in the future. So when you have better capital appreciation in the future, the annual growth of the property, there will be a steady appreciation to the capital, and that normally it translates into a better price of REIT units. And fourthly, ample growth potential. Okay, some REITs has the first right of refusal from the owner for it to buy properties in the future. So this perform the supply to the pool of properties that the REIT has. So when this properties mature, the owner may inject it into the REIT.
Right.
So there is actually a growth potential for that particular REIT. And of course, lastly is the financial stability and the related risks involved. Why don't I just go through a bit on the risks? Okay, first is actually the interest rate risk. Okay, REIT trades quite, I mean, in comparison with the government bonds. So whenever the rate of the interest rate is increased, you can see an inverse relationship between the price of REIT as compared to the investment in the bonds. So because investors may shift from investing into REIT into investing into debt market. As REIT is also is a listed instrument, it also have an equity risk as per the other stock listed in the stock market.
Right.
Okay, it also have an income risk depending on the location of the assets being located. It has the income risk, not able to give the right level of return that you are expecting, and of course the volatility of the property market. Yeah. So
those are the major risks that they have to be aware of, lah.
Yes, correct.
All right. So we'll move on to the next section. By the way, if you want to download the presentation slides, you can actually download from your webinar software. There's actually a handouts section over there where you can download to get more what Jano has been explaining. And there are much more information over there as well, so you can get more information, because we only have about an hour, so we actually have to skip a few things. But those are the major points that Jano has pointed out, which is good enough. Next part is, I think we want to look at also the future of the Malaysian property and especially REITs industry. Where do you see the growth for REITs and as an industry? And because other more established markets like the US and the ETFs and the REITs, they play a very major role in investments, right? Their liquidity is high, and even fund managers are actually investing in ETFs and REITs. So where do you see the prospect of REITs in the Malaysian market?
Okay, let's go into the Malaysian REITs markets.
Right.
M-REITs here is actually referring to the Malaysian REIT markets. Okay, these are the examples of REITs that is listed in Bursa Malaysia. As you can see, I've split into two categories. One is specialized REITs and the other one is diversified REITs. Specialized REITs covers a few categories of assets, namely is the office REIT. As you can see, those are some of those REIT that actually has assets primarily in the form of office. Another one is industrial in the form of Atrium REIT. Healthcare, which I mentioned earlier, is also one of the i-REITs. And hospitality REIT, which is actually, we have one thus far, is YTL Hospitality REIT.
Right.
We have also retail in the form of IGB REIT, Hectare Classic, Hectare REIT. They own assets in such as Subang Parade, and I think Mahkota Parade as well in Malacca. And there's the recent one is KIP REIT, KIP REIT. The other REITs are namely like retail focus, which in the form of Pavilion. Pavilion has mainly, they have also a few other REITs, but other assets, but namely they are focusing on retail. So like Pavilion and also Daman in USJ. We have industrial focus REIT, which is Aziz REIT, and we have also office focus REIT, which is in the form of KLCC Staple Group,
right,
and also Amanah Raya. Okay, so the industry has grown by leaps and bounds, and from the first REIT that was set up in 2006, it started with a market cap of 5.5 billion. It has now grown to 40.9 billion. So what it means is the REIT industry has grown thus far. I mean, of course, it depends also very much depending on the properties that owned by the REITs.
Right.
So in order for it to grow as such, it has to be an asset that is actually located in strategic area, which can generate good rental income.
Right.
Okay. This is the next chart give the market capitalization of the REIT. The one highlighted in green, actually the i-REIT. The one extreme left is actually the KSCP Staple Group, which is from the biggest REIT in Malaysia. And in terms of market capitalization, it constitutes about 2.5% of the total market cap by Bursa Malaysia.
Right.
And this totals up to 7 billion, and it's constituted by the 18 REITs. There is also one currently REIT which is not listed in the form of Alpha REIT. It is actually an education REIT specialized in education. Okay. So this is showing the how the M-REITs total asset has grown. It is actually in terms of cumulative annual growth rate, it has recorded about from 2006 until 2017, 23% in terms of CAGR growth. You see, so it is an growing, and I believe in future this REIT will also grow. Later on, we can see even in the recent budget, the government has also announced the setting up of an airport REIT.
Right.
It is actually encouraging. We applaud that move by the government. What it means is just adding a new class of asset into REIT, compared to the existing REIT that we have, as I highlighted in the slide. Okay. In terms of returns, this one I plot up the returns from various investments in the form of first the left one is in m-REITs that gives a return of about 6.42%. The orange one is the property stocks, and the green one is the MGS, and then the brown is the fixed deposit. The grey one is actually EPF yield, and the blue one is the OPR, the market rate.
Right.
So as you can see, this is in the form of, I think, in the span of 1 year. It is giving better returns as compared to other investment instruments.
Right. This is 1 year, then?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And the thing about REITs is because you almost get certain kind of returns between, like you mentioned earlier, 6 to 6.5% every single year.
Okay.
The kind of returns. You won't get that in stocks, because stocks, I mean, in general, it depends on the performance of the stock market, right?
Yes, exactly. Of course, it can go double-digit growth. It can also go, below that.
Right.
So investment in REIT provides a stable return in terms of a stable income return, is it?
Because the main income is actually from rental.
From rental.
It's not the company is having profits. If
Yeah.
they sell more, they make more and all.
And normally this rental is in the form of a long lease period. For a retail, maybe 3 to 5 years.
Right.
For office, can be longer than that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so you're also going to show us the performance against the government.
This slide, it shows actually the average m-REITs, the blue one, compared to the 10-year MGS, the government securities. As you can see, there is actually a spread of about 235 basis points. Normally it's trading a certain basis points above than the MGS. And it's also, from this chart, also giving a better returns compared to the average property yield of 4.34.
4.34.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So that's basically the performance, and of course with the government's initiative to use the now airport having another asset class where investors can look at as well. So that of course the growth is, you mentioned there's a 23% compounded growth every year, and it's quite a lot actually, right?
Yeah.
And you believe that moving forward this growth can be sustained in the next 10 years?
Okay. Of course, it depends on the strategy that is being adopted by REIT. But I think so long as the assets class that the REIT has is maintained based on the current assets that they have, I think it can. Because the assets are actually located in strategic areas, it should be able to provide better returns as compared to the other property stocks.
And I guess Malaysia being we are still not really a developed or industrialized nation. We are still an emerging market, and that gives a lot of more room for the property market to grow, and that's where we can see the real growth is towards being an industrial nation.
Yes.
So I think every investor should take part of this property investment. We'll be losing out, right? Everybody is making money through properties. We have seen the result. I mean, like 60% are still they have to take an action. Now let's move on. Let's understand a little bit about KLCC Staple Group, right? Because you're a little bit different from the other REITs because you're actually stapled together with the property and also KLCC property and also KLCC REIT. So maybe you want to explain a little bit how
okay. Okay, first, just a brief background. We are the largest internally managed staple security. When I say internally managed, the property manager resides within the listed entity. If you compare against other REITs, they are a property manager that is actually owned by the owner, and the manager is actually being paid the management fee, and as such, there is actually a leakage in terms of payment to the sponsor. Okay, we are diversified, but we are an office-focused REIT with, of course, the main assets are the Twin Towers, the Tower 3, and also ExxonMobil. We constitute about 33% of the Malaysian REIT market capitalization.
Right.
Okay, these are the key strengths that we believe we have. The assets are actually prime and located in best class assets, located between the KLCC city center.
So who doesn't know KLCC, right?
Yep, true. And we also have a good tenant who is also in the form of our shareholder, which is Petronas. So we are stable in that sense. We have a long-term lease period with Petronas. The Twin Towers is actually for a 15-year period, and the Tower 3 is also for 15-year period, and still a long way to go, expiring only in 2027.
Right.
And we have growth potential in the form of the existing development that we have. Being developed. Some are the assets being developed within KLCC precinct, which is owned by the shareholder, Petronas, and we have the first right of refusal for those assets. Should Petronas or KLCC Holdings wants to divest, the REIT has first right of refusal for those. So what it means is we have a visible growth potential in the future. Okay, this gives the structure to answer Benny's question. We are a staple structure. We are the only staple REIT in Malaysia. What it means is there are some assets owned by the REIT and some assets are not owned by the REIT, which is owned under the KLCC Property Holdings Berhad. However, both companies are actually the shares are stapled together. We have a stapling deed which govern that, and the shares are actually traded as one. So if you are investors in the KLCCP staple group, you own the REIT and the REIT assets. At the same time, you own the KLCCP property holdings, which own the various other assets, which is set out in the slides, namely Daya Bumi and Mandarin Oriental, Suria KLCC, and 33% of Menara MXis, and also the property management arm.
Right.
So this structure is quite common in abroad, particularly in Australia. Later on, you can see part of the growth strategy is also injection of those assets under the KLCC property holdings into the REIT. Because once the asset is actually matured enough, or in later if you own 100% of the asset, we may inject it into REIT, to take advantage of the tax structure. Okay. So that's actually mainly the how the staple structure works. And these are the example of the assets. I think many of us are aware of those assets. Okay, we categorize the asset namely within three categories: the office, retail, and hotel. The only hotel asset that we have is actually Mandarin Oriental. Retail is Suria KLCC, and also there's a retail podium underneath the Menara 3 Petronas. So those are the retail that we have.
Right. So if I own a KLCC REIT, I'll be basically owning the office and the retail and the hotel exposure that you mentioned, right? It's not just. I always love to talk about REITs because you know what, it's visible. You can actually see it, and you may buy a small amount of REIT today, and you may just own a tile on a KLCC property. But if you keep on buying the REITs, you can own a shop one day, right? You get a bigger percentage. So because the good thing is it's visible, right?
It's visible.
You can touch and see, and then and you can even experience the property that's on the vibrancy.
Exactly. So that's the beauty of REIT. You can see the assets. Is actually the assets is actually owned directly by the REIT.
Right. So before we go on further, we're just gonna probably another 5 more minutes. We're just gonna ask you probably 1 or 2 more questions. So the next question is basically if you are already an investor, right? You own shares and so on and so forth. Do you have REITs in your portfolio, in your investment portfolio? That's the next question. Okay, thank you very much. Let's take a look at the poll results. In the meantime, if you still have any questions, please do ask the questions, and the Q&A session is going to come in a very short time. So, so we have investors who already have portfolio. There are 20% actually have REITs in their portfolio, and 80% still do not have investment portfolio. So we'll take a look at that later on, and we already seen the growth in shape. Anwar have just mentioned in the REITs market, in the property market itself. There is, of course, huge potential growth. But what is the growth like for KLCCP?
Okay, just share with you some of the historical records that we have. As you can see from the slides, in all parameters, we have been recording a steady growth, be it in the form of revenue, in terms of profit, and also in terms of the investment properties, the value of our assets that we have. And also not only that, but the distribution or the dividend that we give to the shareholders has been recording a growth. We hope to keep this trend, and that's why I think many of you can look from the historical. I mean, we have just announced our Q3 results last week, and is still recording steady growth as compared to last year.
Right.
So we hope we can continue with this trend going forward.
Okay.
So this is actually the value of the investment properties that we have. As I mentioned, I mean, has been recording steady growth in the past how many years? I think 14 years.
Yes.
The CAGR is about 9.6% within this period. I think because our rental, be it in the form of office rental or also the retail outlets, has been recording a steady growth.
Right.
Although, as you can see from the chart, I mean, there is actually a big jump in the early years. I mean, that's a testament of the retail property that we have used to record double-digit growth. But I mean, due to the competition that we have in the market, currently still recording growth, but not a single-digit growth. Correct. But in this current market, I would say, recording a steady growth, it is already
an achievement. Yes. I guess because the stock market has been going down for the past few years.
Yes.
Compared to this, there's still quite good growth here.
Right?
Congratulations, Anwar. And thank you for joining us. But we are not ending our webinar yet, because this is a time where you can ask Encik Anwar questions. So we have about 20-30 minutes for you to ask questions. We already have some questions here, but before we go to the Q&A, we're going to take a look at the last question, the last poll for you. And the last poll is basically for you to take action. Right. After hearing about REITs today, would you be investing in REITs in the next 1 year? All right. Thank you very much for your participation. Now let's take a look at the results, and I hope the results will be a good one, so that yes, so yeah, we have actually 92% saying that they're going to invest in REITs in the next 1 year. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Chianwa, you are able to convince them. But
I hope they will convince their friends as well.
yes. And I think, REITs is one of the best investments that you can find, especially if you want to be exposed into the property market, right? This is one of the best ways. It's professionally run, and the returns are basically quite steady over the years.
Right.
Yeah. So now let's move on to the Q&A session, right? So I guess most of the questions will be towards Encik Anwar. So the first question is asked, what do you think is the one best advantage that Sharia-compliant REITs have over conventional ones?
Oh, okay. It is the pool of investors that can invest in REITs, because you need a big pool of investors to ensure that the liquidity of the REITs, the shares are there. Why I say the bigger pool of investors is, if a fund that manage an Islamic fund, they can only invest into an Islamic instrument. So in this case, i-REITs qualify for that. At the same time, the conventional funds that manage the non-Islamic funds can also invest into an i-REITs. So what it means is both funds can actually invest into an i-REITs. So as such, there's actually a bigger pool of funds that can invest into i-REITs. And when you have a bigger pool of funds chasing a limited number of trusts, the i-REITs, that shows that whenever the shares are traded, that shows that the liquidity is there.
Right.
If the shares are being sold, I'm sure that there is actually another fund that is intend to buy. And when this actually happen, what it means is the shares are easily tradable. When the shares are easily tradable, and it can theoretically translate into a better price of REITs.
In fact, when you look at the performance between the Sharia index and the conventional one, that that actually shows the benefit of having the additional pool of funds.
Correct.
Right? So next question. Why does the share price of some REITs drop after distribution of dividends?
Oh. Well, to comment on share price is market forces. Maybe they expect the investors expect more dividends to come, and what is being declared is slightly less. So as such, it reduces their appetite, and then thus actually translate into the weaker share price. That can be one of the reasons, but that is actually applicable for not only just REIT, but also for stocks as a whole.
Generally, for stock markets, normally we will have stock price adjusting itself.
Correct. Yes. And so I would say that kind of risk is not particular only for REIT. Is also applicable for other stocks.
It could be times when actually the price went higher after the distribution.
Correct.
Right. Okay, so now next question: how will the real property gain tax, which is announced in the new budget, affect KLCC REIT and other i-REITs in general? Do you think it's positive for the REITs industry, or the other way around?
Okay, generally the measures being announced with regards to the RPGT affects the property markets, because if you hold the assets more than 5 years, if it is a company, you need to pay 10%.
Right.
If it is an individual, you need to pay 5%. So it increases for company. Last time used to be 5, now 10. For individual, 0 after 5 years, now 5%. That will affect REIT too, because although REIT is not considered as a company, but as far as the real property gains tax is concerned, it's treated as if like an individual. So if REIT sells that property after 5 years, the RPGT of 5% kicks in.
Right.
So that if you look from one point of view, whereby selling of assets But there is an advantage for REIT. If you have any other asset, or REIT is buying asset from a potential seller, should that be sold into REIT, that potential seller is not charged for RPGT.
Right.
That is based on the current ruling. So I'm not sure whether in future will there be any change. So any assets being disposed into REIT is RPGT free.
Right.
So what it means is the REIT can only grow because of this advantage that they have. Then it just means that future injection of assets into REIT is welcome.
Yeah. Right. So you have to look at which way you are looking at it.
Right. You can see one advantage, and of course there's also another disadvantage with regards to the.
But normally for REITs, I mean, if you invest in a property, you don't really flip the property, right? You don't really sell, dispose, or divest the property in 5 years. It's normally long-term in nature.
Long-term in nature, correct. You can see, I mean, quite seldom that we buy and sell. Especially like KLCC property staple group, we don't have any intention to dispose our current assets that we have.
All right. So next question: will Sharia compliance prevent big expansions for i-REITs as more debt cannot be taken? I'm not sure what the question really means.
Can you repeat that again?
You can read the question from me. Actually, will Sharia compliance? So you talk about Sharia compliance prevent big expansions for i-REITs as more debt cannot be taken?
Oh, okay. It does not differentiate between REIT and i-REIT because the guideline allows REIT, be it in REIT, the conventional REIT or i-REIT, to gear up to 50% of the total assets of REIT. It is quite sizable, and if you can see, almost all REIT are still below than 40% in terms of gearing. For KLCC is very much lower, as currently we are at 17%.
Right.
So what it means is, if we want to grow, we can gear up. I mean, borrow more, and we believe the debt market in Malaysia is quite deep, and sukuk for issuance, and if we would issue sukuk, we believe that there is actually still potential subscriber in the form of either banks or insurance companies still continue to want to invest into the REIT market, if not KLCC.
Right. So there's actually no limitations.
There's no really disadvantage with regards to i-REITs in terms of borrowing capacity, because the guideline covers both REIT as well as the conventional and the Islamic REIT.
Right. Okay, so next question: what do you think are the advantages of being a specialized REIT? Because remember, you mentioned you have the diversified REITs, you have a specialized REIT, and what's the here the question is what do you think the advantages are as compared to, let's say, the more diversified ones?
Okay. What it means is, when it's specialized, even the REIT manager is also a specialist in that area.
Right.
So what it means is, whenever there's actually growth strategy with regards to that area, when you are already managing a certain kind of asset, let's say an office asset, it knows, the REIT manager knows in and outs of those assets. So when it is being managed by a specialist in the area, what it means is actually just good for that REIT. Whether the REIT is actually specializing in one asset or diversifying into other asset, I mean, the returns from those assets is actually more important compared, for an investor. And if you are the investor, it's actually your call whether you want to invest into a specialized REIT or into a more diversified REIT, or even you can have your own portfolio of REITs. You can have one portion of your investment in REITs into an office focused REIT. You can even have in hospitality, or you can also have a mix of other retail or hotel.
Right. Right.
So it allows you to diversify on your own with regards to this, and this can I mean the historical records, historical trend of paying dividends plays a key important area in your decision making.
So I guess that's the good thing about REITs, because you don't really need a large pool of capital to actually diversify into so many, like you say, is if as much as 1,000 ringgit, you can already start buying some REITs.
It's like buying shares. So and the process is also the same. So compared to buying properties, it's actually a long run process.
All right, so next question, can non-Malaysians invest in REITs?
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, it's like buying any shares, right? So non-Malaysians can actually buy. So it's listed in Bursa Malaysia, so you can buy like any other shares.
Any other shares, right. You have your trading account, CDS account, then you can start buying.
Right. So it's like basically trading a stock.
Yeah.
Okay, now this question is a little bit more technical. I think probably this guy is investing, so he wants you to elaborate more about the figures, the DPU, dividend per unit, the NAV and gearing ratio. What do these ratios mean in the statements?
DPU means distribution per unit. Basically, if you invest in stocks, this is actually the dividend that the company pays. And so if the dividend is, let's say, 30 cents, and then is 30 cents per
whatever unit
per unit that we hold. And this is actually normally you can extract that information from the quarter announcements. If the REIT is paying every quarter, there is actually a clear statement in the announcement how much dividend per unit that distribution per unit that we pay. Secondly is gearing, is it?
Yeah, gearing ratio.
Gearing ratio is actually the total borrowings that a REIT has over the total assets. As I mentioned earlier, the guidelines, the Securities Commission guidelines allows the REIT to gear up to 50%. 50%. So it is quite a big headrooms for any REIT to gear up. Right. So whether a REIT gear up to 50%, it depends on the investment strategy. Some may gear up, or some may issue new units of REIT shares to get money in the forms of maybe rights issue. But typically, a REIT will borrow in order to fund its acquisition, because as you can see, the guidelines requires REIT to distribute 90% of the distributable income as dividends if the REIT wants to continue the tax-free status. So just imagine 90% whatever the REIT gets is being distributed back to the investors. So what is left is only 10% to manage, to do asset enhancements to the property, and that pool is also used for any asset acquisition. So it's not enough, depending on the size of the assets that the REIT want to buy. Right. So the REIT may most likely gear up to acquire new assets.
Right. So they actually have the 50% of the total assets.
Yes. Because the REIT normally has a long-term rental period. So when you gear up in the form of issuing bonds or sukuk, so the repayment profile normally will match against the rental period that the asset has. And so it will be a continuous borrowing. When the rental period expires, then they will go into the next rental period, and the REIT will normally match that rental period, the borrowing period to the rental period.
Right. Okay. The next one is NAV.
NAV, okay, net asset per share. Okay, under the REIT guidelines, the REIT must value its properties every year. So value means we need to get to appoint a professional valuer to value the assets. So if the assets is actually located in a prime location, normally the valuation we have some surplus every year. Normally, So whenever this valuation been done, then we consolidate the value that will give the asset value of the property.
Right.
And this asset value then will be divided against the number of units that the REITs has, and that will give a net asset value per
unit. Right, right. So the value is actually given by the third party valuer. It's not.
Yes, yes. That's why I said the REIT is very highly regulated. Even the value that we put into our audited accounts are actually being supported by a valuer, professional valuer.
Right.
And even the appointment of this valuer is governed by the Securities Commission. Under the new guidelines, it allows the valuer to only one particular valuer can only be appointed not more than 3 years of.
I see.
So after the 3 years, we need to change
another valuer.
Another valuer. Yeah. So because the SC wants to ensure that essentially the asset value is intact and is governed by a professional valuer.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that's new to me. I thought it's like any other NAV that's being calculated in the stock. So it's
it has.
Right, right. Okay. One last question, Encik Anwar. I think this is a bit more simpler. Let's say if my income tax bracket is already at 28%, do I need to pay extra income tax from the REIT's dividend payout, since the withheld tax is only 10%? In other words, do I need to pay the extra 18%?
Okay, it depends on the category of the investor. You look at, in particular, like KLCC, I think in other REITs as well, in the quarterly announcement, we disclose the the different tax exposure for different class of investors.
Oh, sorry, it actually stayed down there.
Yes.
All right.
So depending on, but it does not matter whether you are at a 28% bracket or, but the differentiator is either you are an institution or individual, or you are a corporate, you are a foreign or a local investor.
Right.
So that is actually a different, I can't remember exactly, but you can refer to the announcement in regards to different class of investors which subject to a different level of tax.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Encik Anwar, to answer the questions. And this comes to an end to our webinar.